Our next speaker, we have a fellow from this fast-growing business process outsourcing industry that everybody hears headlines about, and which Philippines has become the preeminent power in the world, I would say, in this sector. And so Jeff Uthoff is his name. He's an American fellow. He's president of TELUS International, one of the premier outfits in Philippines. I'll just give a bit of a background. He'll do in more detail, but again, I mentioned before that I've had the impression given to me sometimes by Filipinos that they think that people who are foreigners or from wealthy countries, they start off at the top and then move up from there. Jeff is another example. He comes from a small farming town in Iowa, and his original plan, as I understand it, was to be a preacher, and went to school and so forth, and that was his purpose. But somehow he got sidetracked into business and became involved in what is still the fast-growing contact center industry. And within a short time, you'll see him as a motivational type, perhaps, but he was very quickly made a name for himself in this industry, managing large sites across multiple cities in the United States. So he continued growing his career and became one of the youngest senior leaders in the industry. He first learned about Philippines when he joined a company called ICT Group as executive vice president, and he was responsible for 8,000 people, including sites in the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and Philippines. And this was his first experience in Philippines, coming back and forth and so forth. In a roundabout way, there was some changes. He ended up running the CEO of the IBM Dax organization. This is the contact center division of IBM. And then most recently, over the past couple of years, joined TELUS Philippines as the president. And so please welcome Jeff Uthoff of TELUS International. Oh, and I should say, he apologizes today, and I'll tell you what I hope is a funny story that I hope he doesn't mind telling. But he said that he said, Richard, I hope you don't mind, but I forgot my jacket. Is anybody going to mind? And what had happened, he a couple of years ago adopted a young Filipino boy, and he was on the floor playing with them before coming to work or coming to here, and he took his jacket off while he was doing that, and then when he rushed out the door, he forgot his jacket. So that's the story. And we're glad to have you speak, Jeff.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Richard. So mental note to all of you, don't ever tell Richard anything unless you want it to be advertised in a public forum. Richard and Rebecca and I have been friends for a long, long time, and it's indeed an honor to have an opportunity to speak to you all for a few minutes. I do feel a little sheepish and a little embarrassed with this distinguished crowd that I feel a little underdressed, so I apologize for that. But as Richard said, I was rolling around on the floor with little Lukey, and the boss gave me a ride to work today and told me I had to hurry, and I forgot my jacket, so my apologies. 100 years ago when I was in university, I took a class on public speaking, and I don't remember a lot about the class except that they said, never, ever, ever be the speaker before or after lunch. So I have the distinguished opportunity to be the speaker after lunch, which is great. The other thing I remember from that class actually is that they said, always tell a lot of jokes. Tell a joke at the beginning to loosen up the crowd, and then if you ever feel like you're losing the crowd throughout your speech, throw another couple jokes in there. So I've tried to embrace that, and it worked pretty well for me until I came to the Philippines. I actually moved to the Philippines. This is my 6th year here, and I think my humor gets lost a little bit on the Filipino people. I'm married to a lovely little Filipina Cebuana lady that's all of like 4'8". I look like Godzilla when I'm walking down the street with her. And I think it was actually at the CEO Forum several years ago I had an opportunity to speak. Rebecca invited me, and I My wife Lily came with me, and when I was riding home afterwards, I said, and you know, I love the Philippine culture. In a moment, I'll tell you, I've had the experience to be all over the world, and I love the Philippine culture. I couldn't help but be amused with some of the things Eric talked about earlier, the characterizations and stuff, and they resonated. And while I too struggle trying to get the super talented Filipino leaders to be more decisive and direct, one of the things I have no issue with is directness from my wife or directness from Filipinos in personal settings. One of my favorites is when I haven't seen somebody for a couple years and they say, "Jeff, how are you?" And I say, "Great, it's nice to see you." And they look at me and they say, "You've put on a lot of weight." And I say, "Thank you." But that morning I was riding home with my wife after speaking at the CEO Forum, and I said, "So how'd I do?" She's my number one critic. And I said, "How'd I do, sweetheart?" And she said, "You were good. You're always good. You did good." And I said, "Okay, thanks." And then there was a little bit of a pause, so I knew something was coming. And I said, "What?" And she said, "Well, I think you need to stop telling the jokes." And I said, "Why? Because the Filipinos don't get my sense of humor?" And she said, "No, because you're really not that funny." So I will try to make it through the next 15 minutes without telling any jokes. No promises, but I will try. I'm going to speak to you real briefly about my background and history, what I believe is my success foundation, and kind of the core success principles and lessons that I've learned. I have an opportunity down here, frequently it seems like, to do public speaking, which I really enjoy. I have fun with it, but I had to step and kind of reflect and think this time when Rebecca asked me to speak, because she said, "I want you to talk about what's made you successful in your career." And usually I'm talking about some BPO, core topic, or talking about TELUS International's unbelievable culture, which is really easy for me. And this one was a bit unusual. I really wanted to step back and reflect and think, what is it really? What do I attribute the blessed life that I have and the professional success? What do I attribute that to? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. My background and my history, as Richard said, I'm an Iowa farm kid. For those of you that aren't familiar with the geography in the U.S., Iowa's right in the middle of the United States. It's all like cornfields and farms and about as provincial, I believe, as you could get in the United States, and that's the community I came from. My entire extended family is still there. I left many, many years ago to venture out around the country in this industry, and my family thought that there was something wrong with me. They couldn't understand why I would leave, and then several years ago when I told them I was moving to the Philippines, I think they tried to hurry and get a minister to see if I was possessed or something, because they really couldn't understand what the heck I was doing. But it gave me a great foundation of being grounded, and life in Iowa is a simple and blessed life. I have 2 degrees, as Richard said, one in business and one in religion. I'm actually an ordained minister. One of my party lines used to be, I would tell people I married my brother, which is true, but I was the minister performing the ceremony. I didn't actually marry him. I have, believe it or not, I have 7 children and 1 grandchildren. I'm very old, big lolo na. And I have children from the ages of 25 to 2. So if any of you want any child rearing advice, you can give me a holler, because believe me, I've seen it and done it all. I've been in the call center industry, if you can believe it, for 26 years. I started when I was 5, and I started in 1987. I ran a call center for APAC Teleservices back when the call center was really outbound. And you didn't have predictive dialers, and you didn't have databases with records. You had tables with papers, and you had to have runners that would sort the leads and run them to the people calling. And these were the people that would call people at home and try and sell stuff to them. And just to keep me grounded, when I start to feel a little self-important about what I've accomplished over my career, I remember anytime I go back to Iowa, even today, if I would go back to Iowa, and if we would be entertaining some visitors with my mother, who's a grandma now, big old farm grandma, and if somebody said, "What does your son Jeff do? He works in the Philippines, is that right?" Without missing a beat, she would say, he's one of those guys on the phone that calls you and interrupts your dinner trying to sell you something. And I would say, okay, Mom, I never did that, and I'm the president of a company now, but she keeps me grounded. I've been in the Philippines, as I said, for 6 years. I had the great pleasure to come down here with ICT Group. And when they were acquired by Sykes, I had the tremendous honor to go and be the CEO of IBM Docs Philippines, which was an adventure. And I probably would still be there because IBM is a pretty incredible company with a lot of opportunity. But some rascal, I won't mention any names, Richard Mills, came and told me about this unbelievable culture that was TELUS International that I had to take a look at. And 2 years ago, I left IBM to become the president of TELUS International Philippines. I'll just tell you real briefly, because TELUS is a very quiet company in the Philippines, a little bit about TELUS's culture. I've truly not seen anything like it in all of my 26 years in this fine industry. I had thought that I had seen it all, and TELUS is really, really something special. There's a lot of very high caliber, high quality BPO companies out there that are providing a lot of opportunities for talented Filipinos, but TELUS is really, really something special. A couple, and you know, I get asked, even to this day, given that TELUS is not a well-known company, I still get messages on LinkedIn and stuff, and people say, what, you left IBM to go where? What the heck is TELUS? And the answer is always the same, and it's always really easy for me. The culture at TELUS is unlike anything I've ever seen. The respect that all team members, partners, and people are afforded from TELUS is unlike anything that I've ever seen. My very first experience with TELUS, for those of you that don't know, the parent company is a $12 billion Canadian telecommunications company, and TELUS International is a wholly owned subsidiary, which is a BPO, ITO company in 7 countries with 16,000 employees, the majority of which are in the Philippines. And my first experience, I flew to Vancouver to meet with the CEO of TELUS Communications. I'd only been with the company for a couple months, and my boss, a Canadian, said, don't think because you've only been here a couple months that he'll take it easy on you. He's a tough dude, so you better be ready. And so I spent like 2 days, I don't think I got any sleep, going over all the financials and going over all the client information and seeing where we could take cost out, seeing where we could grow revenue. And I'm like, all right, you bring it on, buddy, I'm ready. And I flew to Vancouver and went in and met Darren, the CEO. And I had an hour with him, which having an hour with somebody that runs a $12 billion a year company is a luxury. His time is very, very valuable. And I went in there and I said, all right, you know, I'm ready, bring it on. And we sat down and he said, okay, Jeff, we're going to talk about your engagement scores. And I swear to goodness, guys, I almost had a heart attack because I had no idea what that even meant. And TELUS uses a third party, Aon Hewitt, to conduct engagement surveys twice a year for every single leadership person on the team. And it's a arduous and complicated process that they go through in order to get information on every single leader from frontline supervisor up to president on how the team members feel about them. And in my first experience with TELUS, the CEO spent an hour going through 3 years of engagement scores for all of the leaders in the Philippines, and any of those that weren't at 70% engagement, which is Aon Hewitt's world-class standard. He asked me, what's their issue, what don't they get about our culture, and how are you going to fix these guys or move them off the team? And it was surreal, guys. Of all the organizations I've been a part of and all the business discussions I've been involved in, I'd never had an experience like that in my life. And it told me very quickly that TELUS was very, very different and that I'd come to the right place. A couple of the other things that TELUS does, TELUS has a day of service, which is unlike anything I've ever seen. Again, a few months into the company, we have charitable events almost every weekend, but a couple months into the company, we had our big day of service, which is an annual event, and I woke up to a blistery, horrible Filipino day, and I live down south, so I had to get up early to go up to the event, and I looked out the window, and it was rainy and blistery and horrible, and I said to my wife, do I really need to go? And she said, I think you do. And I went and I expected a couple hundred people to show up, given that in the BPO industry, most of the people have just finished working for 9 or 10 hours and are typically going to bed. And I was utterly amazed to watch bus after bus after bus roll up and to watch 3,000 of TELUS's team members come out to spend the day. Let me cut off my mic. It's been nice talking to you. Thank you very much. To watch, thanks, Richard. To watch 3,000 team members roll out and spend the day building houses and playing with kids and refurbishing wetland areas, and I've never seen anything like that. We also have a TELUS. It's divine intervention. You guys are going to be spared for the rest of my speech. We also have. Okay, check. Is it okay? We also have. Seems a little loud to me. I feel like God at the moment. Okay, long? Thanks. We have TELUS University, which Dr. Bernie's institution is actually a part of that, and we have the distinct honor of partnering with 3 of the premier schools and universities in the Philippines, and their professors are kind enough to come into TELUS's facilities 3 times a week and teach classes in our classroom so that our team members in good standing can invest in themselves and get a degree, primarily sponsored by TELUS, in any number of disciplines from culinary arts to IT to liberal arts, and it is a really, really cool thing that TELUS does. I typically say when I'm giving speeches that I've never seen a culture like TELUS, although I got to tell you guys, earlier when Chandra was up speaking about some of the cool things his culture does, it's very closely aligned with the things TELUS does. In fact, if this gig at TELUS doesn't work out for me, I may give Chandra a call and see if they have an opportunity for me there, because that sounds like a pretty cool culture. Let me talk real briefly, guys, about what I believe is my success foundation. And as I said, I really did try to give it some honest, heartfelt thought, because I feel way more blessed than I deserve, certainly way more blessed professionally than my talent should allow me to be, and I tried to think why. And with all due respect to those of you that may have different religious affiliations or beliefs than I do, no respect or no disrespect intended, number one I have to say is my life and my professional accomplishments are due to God's blessings. At a very early age, amongst all my other shortcomings and stupid things I did, I made a decision to make God as a cornerstone of my life, and I am 100% certain that the professional opportunities that I have gotten in this adventure of a life that I live is because of that decision. The second thing I can attribute it to is my dad. My dad was a big 6'6" farm guy, and he distilled uncompromisingly 3 values in all of us kids when we were little, and number 1 was hard work. Nothing comes easy, and if you want something, work for it. And that's carried through my life. Number 2 is equality and respect, that everyone's equal, and doesn't matter what your status in life, what your stature within an organization, everyone's equal, and I've certainly carried that with me where I've been all around the world. And number 3 is humility. You know, you really can't take credit for anything or be self-important about anything because it's because of a greater force. And honest to goodness, after all of my reflection, I think those 3 qualities that Dad instilled in me at a young age are a big part of my success. The third is I was an athlete 100 years ago and 100 pounds ago. I was a all-state basketball, I know it's hard to believe, but I was an all-state basketball player in Iowa. And I have a great sense of competition and a drive. And I think when I became too old and too fat to play basketball anymore, that hunger translated into a hunger to learn. And throughout my entire career, I have really looked for opportunities to continue to learn, and I've not been complacent. And I think those 3 things together are kind of my success foundation. Then I tried to think about my core success principles and my lessons learned, and I came up with 9 things. It was hard, you know. And it's interesting to me as I listened to the other speakers this morning. I think traditionally people think about success either as coming from people that are really intellectually superior or really, really workaholics and stuff. And some of the common themes that I heard from some of these very established and talented professionals that were up here this morning are in line with what I believe is the essence of success as well, and how you get there. So I tried to distill it down to 9. The first one is, I believe in an uncompromising way you have to embrace fun and accountability in the workplace. I think with either of those missing, you can't be successful, and I think you have to set the tone. And I've been in environments where people think they're mutually exclusive, and clearly they're not. And don't be afraid to shake it up. I can tell you, when I went to IBM here in the Philippines, IBM was a pretty stoic culture. And when I went in there, I did it my way, and I think it was very, very well received. And I would encourage you all to break the norms and look at doing things differently. I remember IBM obviously has a large presence of Indians, and I remember talking to a couple of the Indian executives and being introduced after I'd just been at IBM for a short couple weeks to them. And I remember one of them saying, "Oh, Jeff, yes, I've heard of you. I've heard you're so jolly." And made me feel like I was Santa Claus or something. But I knew my message of having fun at work and not taking yourself too seriously was getting through. And in 2010, by the way, guys, IBM Docs Philippines grew by 4,200 people in the CRM division in 1 year under my team's leadership. And I can tell you, there's no way we would have accomplished that, and there's no way we would have survived without embracing fun in the workplace and without embracing accountability. And accountability is simple, right? You inform people what's expected of them, and you provide support and correction when they don't deliver. And you don't have to be unpleasant or unkind or too serious in order to do that, but you have to, in an unwavering way, enforce accountability and enforce fun. Easy in the Philippines. You all know how to party down here for sure. My second core concept is you have to inspire and challenge leaders. Be very, very direct and break the status quo. Different people are inspired by different things. So one of the things I think has led to success is figuring out what it takes individually to inspire. And check yourself every once in a while. Find out if you've really got your senior leadership team inspired, and if you're really challenging them, and shake them up. Here in the Philippines, I learned a lesson to talk about never stop learning. I found very quickly when I came down here how important it is as a leader to be visible, and to be visible to the entire team. I was used to spending a lot of time in the office doing strategic, important things before I moved to the Philippines. And coming down here, I found the importance of being very, very visible to the entire team. The fourth point, which I think is a lesson I've learned, is you have to really guard your time. You have to be very thoughtful about where you allow your time to be spent, and who you allow to take your time. And you have to be generous with your time for those that deserve it, but you have to be very stingy with your time for those areas or those individuals that are taking you away from more important things. And that's a concept that I revisit frequently. One of the other things I learned from IBM is the importance of taking risks and switching roles. I have never seen a company that switches people into different roles with the regularity that IBM does. Boy, they take somebody who's been doing a job for 2 or 3 years and drops them into a completely different role. And when I first saw that, I'm like, what in the world? Is something the matter with you guys? But then when I saw the creativity and the fresh perspective and the things that come from that, and I've noted that, and for the rest of my career, I will try and embrace and put that in place everywhere that I go. From a personal perspective, I think there's great value in switching roles as well. And I think I've worked for 8 different companies. Eric, I think, has me beat by a couple, but I've learned so much by experiencing different cultures, different environments. Each organization has their different strengths and stuff. So don't be afraid at the opportune time to switch roles and to learn from a different environment. Next is doing your job is not enough. Don't think by doing your job and doing it really well that's enough and that'll get recognition and promotion and other opportunities. Doing your job and doing it well is kind of the hygiene factor, right? You need to be innovative and be a change agent, and you need to figure out how to expand your sphere of influence beyond your scope of responsibility. That's how you get recognized. That's how you get advancement opportunities. That's how you get a chance to do more. That's been my experience. As several people have said earlier, in a number of different ways. Nurture relationships. I pride myself on believing that I don't have any enemies. Maybe my ex-wife. Not really. We're very close. But I really do nurture and guard relationships because as, I don't remember if it was Eric or the gentleman from IRemit, you just never know when you're going to bump into somebody again, professionally, number one. And number two, if you have a disagreement or if you don't feel that you're able to respect somebody, peel the onion back a little bit, and I bet you can get to some common ground, and I bet you there's a misunderstanding because everybody's pretty good people. And the advice I give to my hundreds of children are, if you want to be successful in work, you nurture relationships. You take advantage of every opportunity you have to build a relationship with somebody and make the most of it. I saved the most important two for last. As a few other people have said, I believe you have to embrace absolute integrity in everything you do. And let me tell you guys, over the last 26 years, have I had my share of opportunities to step from the integrity path, and have I been tempted? But I believe ultimate success comes from absolute integrity, and I hope you all have the strength when you're tempted to take a shortcut or to cheat or to do something that doesn't embrace absolute integrity, that you have the personal strength of character not to fall into that trap. The last one is the concept which a few different business gurus have talked about. I don't know who coined it. Maybe it was John Maxwell. But it's the concept of servant leadership and really making it about the people. It's especially in the Philippines where you're treated, to the slide about hierarchy and look at the boss here. It's so easy to become self-important and to think, wow, look at what I've accomplished and look where I'm at. I think servant leadership is a concept that is important everywhere in the world, and I think it motivates, it inspires. Interestingly, when I joined TELUS, there was a gentleman who was a 10-year TELUS executive who was kind of frustrated because he thought he was going to get the role of president when my predecessor left and I came in, so he wasn't real happy. But he's still with TELUS, and he's doing great. And within the first 3 months, I took him aside, and I said to him very respectfully and very honestly, you got 90 days to show me that you understand servant leadership, or you're going to be working someplace else. Because he was a very hierarchical, brilliant, driven, successful man, but very hierarchical, very dictatorial, and I realized very quickly that's not going to work in the culture I want to build, and I told him you got 90 or 120 days, and to his credit, he is a different person, and the visiting president a few months ago was down and said, boy, Jeff, I don't know what you did to X, but my gosh, he's a different person. And it was as simple as that, guys. It was as simple as honesty and directness and telling him honestly, you embrace servant leadership or you take your game someplace else. In closing, I think these have also been talked about, but I think you have to have great passion for what you're doing, and I think you have to bring that passion every day. And I would tell you all respectfully, if you don't have passion in what you're doing every day, regardless of whether you're 20 or 100, and regardless of whether you're a frontline person or a CEO, if you don't bring passion with you every day, I think you need to do something else. And I think you need to step back and figure out how you can do that. I can't imagine living life without being passionate about what I do every day. And then my last one, promise, is a story my mentor at IBM told me. My mentor at IBM was a neat guy. He was the head of global services, an American, 35-year IBM guy, tough dude, man. And he somehow was my personal mentor. And we were out having a few beers one night, and we were talking. And in IBM, you have bands. You like when you're an executive D, or the lower, the like an A is a higher band. And he told me a story, and this guy is third from the top of IBM, one of the most successful professionals there. And we were having a few beers, and I don't remember how the conversation started, but he said, you know what, Jeff, I've been at IBM for 35 years, and he said, I worked for 4 years to get my band A. I think there's like I don't know, 30 or 40 band days in the whole world for IBM, a company that's 600,000 people, and so it's quite an honor. And he said, you know, I worked for 4 years to get this band A, and at the point I got it, I felt such a sense of accomplishment. And he said, I looked around with great excitement, and I wanted to share it with my family and friends. And he said, to my discontent, I guess, I realized I didn't have any. He said, I left my family along the wayside. And he said, God bless them, and boy, are they well provided for financially. But he said, they're not with me, and they could care less about my promotion. And he said, I looked to tell my friends and to celebrate with them. And he said, I realized I don't have any. So he said, I had a beer myself alone to celebrate this promotion that I'd worked for 4 years. And he said, I can tell you're an ambitious young man, Jeff. He must have mistaken my age, obviously. But he said, I'm not sure I would do it again. And he said, don't let anybody tell you that you can't have success and a balanced work-life balance. And coming from somebody at IBM, which that's a foreign concept too, in my opinion, was a pretty incredible statement. But I can tell you guys, I believe that as well. And I absolutely don't believe you need to work 60 hours a week or you need to sacrifice everything else in your life to be successful. In fact, I think the most successful professionals embrace a work-life balance and enjoy life outside of work as much as they do within work. And I think that makes them fresher and better and more creative. So those are my secrets. You know it all now. One of these days I'll write a book, but I gave you guys the inside scoop. Certainly an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to you all this morning. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well done. I hope you can stay around for the question panel. I don't know if you can. Oh, okay, you got to hang out. Okay. Well, we've got a gift for you. But a wonderful motivational presentation. I think in his next career, I think he should be a motivational speaker. Okay, our next fellow, Noel Mendoza, country director of Hewlett Packard. For many years, Noel Mendoza started in the IBM organization from the IT side and worked his way up. He was with that group for 20-some years, as I recall, and became the CEO of the IBM Philippines, and did fabulous work when they, right? Okay, well, he'll correct me maybe. But played a key role in having them move their outsource IT operations here, which is now certainly one of the nation's most successful on the IT side. Over the past few years, he made a momentous decision and left IBM after many years to join Hewlett Packard, where he's been for the past 7 years, and has done a tremendous role there, building their IT organization. So he's clearly one of the nation's premier IT leaders. So please welcome Noel Mendoza of Hewlett Packard.
Thank you very much, Richard. Let me just get set up here. Okay, good afternoon. So, Richard asked me to talk about two things. One was my story, and the second one was ideas about strategies for business and career success. Well, given everything that's happening with the global economy, seeing the shift of fortunes from developed nations to developing nations, I'm really not 100% sure that there are any set patterns for strategies or business or career success. But I can probably summarize that very quickly by saying you have to work hard and prepare, since you really never know what fortune may bring to you. But let me start with my story, and let's see if there's other new messages or ideas that we can glean from this. Preparing for my professional life really started back in my college years, and that's when it hit me. No more handouts in a few years. So faced with this dilemma, I realized very soon I had to decide for myself, what the hell did I like to do for the rest of my life, and how do I prepare my way for that? How best to prepare for that? Do I take a sciences course or do I take humanities? Which one would actually better prepare me for that? So being brash and very impatient, I enrolled in one of the most prestigious courses there was, engineering. I went into management engineering, and after a year of that, guess what? I really didn't enjoy all of the calculus, all of the math and the counting. So on my second year, I switched. There was a newly opened course called Legal Management. I really enjoyed learning about the law, torts and damages, obligations and contracts. And it was about people, so I could relate very easily to that. However, down the road, I really couldn't see myself becoming a lawyer. So it was at that point I decided to go to my dad and ask for some advice. My father was a business school professor at the AIM. It was a school that he had helped start. So I'd suppose maybe he'd know a thing or two about this and probably could give us some guidance that I needed for that time. I talked to him about it. He listened a little bit, and then he said to me, really, there's nothing wrong with what you're taking. The problem seems to be your approach to learning. His simple advice was, you have to learn before you learn to do. The what's and the whys are just as important as the how. And if you love to learn, all of the rest will follow. The what's and the whys are just as important as the hows. It really provides the context and meaning for the work that we embark on. So, seeing I had less luck with my initial attempts, I decided maybe the humanities were more of my liking. After all, the school was known for that humanities courses. I truly enjoyed the humanities in the Ateneo, history lessons, the arts, philosophical debates and arguments. My final thesis was a submission of poetry. Little did I know, a few years later, I'd actually be writing lines of code rather than lines of poetry. What I learned after all of this, it's really the and that really makes the big difference. It's being able to combine both the arts and the sciences, critical thinking, history, philosophy, arts and religion, and all of the disciplines of the sciences. I often find some of the best people that we have are both left and right brain thinkers. My dad was absolutely passionate about learning, and he modeled this by example. After all, he was a teacher. He always filled our house with hundreds and hundreds of books, dictionaries and encyclopedias. And every house that we'd always have one room reserved as the library. And he'd, of course, encourage us to use and go through as much of it as we could. You know how children love to ask, what's and why's? Well, for us, after a few years, there weren't any easy explanations for us. The response would always be, look it up in the dictionary, or followed by, well, look it up in the encyclopedia. Essentially, we had to learn for ourselves. The School of Life is really the biggest classroom. So, this early introduction into self-directed lifelong learning was one of the most important lessons that I ever had. And now with the internet and the access to everything digital, we really have no excuse for not learning anything. This is my professional life in numbers. 1 career, 2 companies, 16 roles, 30 years in the industry. I'll come to the last number in a little bit. I essentially lived through computing history, all the way from punch cards now to cloud computing. I started as an inventory clerk in IBM's distribution, right beside the punch card factory. It entailed working in the back office, selling punch cards by day, and encoding all of the receipts, doing data entry by night. I still remember 1136-479. That's the part number for our most sellable product. which is a typewriter cartridge ribbon. I eventually worked my way out of there by offering to computerize all of the inventory of the distribution center, making use of some of the new skills that I had gained in a programming class that I had taken, in previous years. My justification for that whole investment was real-time access to information and, of course, reduced cost. I essentially coded myself out of the job because I was the cost savings. Given my newly discovered talents in computers, I decided maybe we should be in the data center to work as a computer operations. I still remember my very first meeting with the team. I sat through 2 whole hours of discussion with them, and I didn't understand a single word they said. The conversation went something like this. On our 4341, with 3330 attached DASDs, and VM as the OS, if we set V is equal to R, can we minimize paging of the virtual machine? I was saying to myself, what did I get myself into? It sounded like they were speaking Martian or Greek, and that was 2 whole hours, and I didn't understand a thing. Thus, after that, I spent my lunch hours in the library, getting all my hands on the manuals and journals just to keep up and understand what they were saying. Eventually, I started to learn to love IT and all of the jargon that went with that. Over the years, I learned the ropes. So I moved from one technical role to the next, from data center operations to service management, then applications programming, and then systems engineering, third-level support, network specialist, solutions architect, a project manager, quality assurance rep. I've been moved, and then finally a manager for advanced technologies and networking. And then, of course, other manager roles followed, like the head for consulting and systems integration. After that, there were a regional role or 2 that followed as well. Let's move now and talk a little bit about change. Usually when technology and market forces shift and markets can't adapt, the old rules and formulas that were once successful paradigms no longer apply. This leads to trouble and upheaval, massive changes, and if not, obsolescence and death for some of the companies. IT lore is actually littered by companies that came and went. Burroughs, Univac, NCR, Honeywell, all of those in the 80s were big company names. Commodore, Atari, Polaroid, Napster, and Sun. Again, companies that didn't respond to change very quickly. My first turnaround was experienced with Lou Gerstner. I joined Big Blue back in 1983. It was, at that time, the most successful IT company in the market. But by 1990, it had gotten itself into heaps of trouble. Nimble competition, new technologies were starting to redefine the landscape. And we were so busy competing with ourselves that it got so bad that they eventually had to bring in an outsider to help sort things out at IBM. And that was Lou Gerstner. He was a non-IT executive. He was better known for running companies like RJ Nabisco or American Express. And so we had serious doubts about his ability to understand technology. However, he's now credited with one of the most remarkable business turnarounds in history. He shared lessons on driving a turnaround in his book, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? And he said, change came to IBM in large part due to the pride and energy of the employees themselves. He worked on changing the culture, creating willingness to win, stopping internal competition, and getting us to focus on what needed to be done and helping each other win. That's the job of a leader in a turnaround. Like a magician, he suspends belief. He sets the stage so that audience, which is usually us, start to believe seemingly impossible things can actually happen. And then, with skillful orchestration and often help from the audience, he just does that. It's really mind-boggling to think that any one person can pull hundreds, if not thousands of people out of a hole that they behaved themselves into after several years. But that's exactly what he did. The second turnaround was with a small 300-man company called ISD. I accepted to take the job over a long-distance phone call while I was on a business trip to Japan. my old boss and mentor called me and he said, I need you back in Manila to run a subsidiary that's gotten into trouble. Little did I know back then what I got myself into. When I arrived back home, this is what I found. We had 7 troubled projects, unhappy customers, a company that was breathing red financially for the last few years, and many, many dissatisfied employees who had not been given any increase for the last couple of years. Leadership of the sub always came from the parent company. That led to ill feelings between the two. Our business partners hated us for competing with them in their space. And to top it all off, we were competing in a highly commoditized market segment. Cabling, maintenance, reselling products for very little value add. Essentially, this translated into low margins. It was just an unsustainable business for us. Our supposed high-margin SI projects were actually in trouble and bleeding money. So investments in skills, new offerings, and partnerships had little or no runway to be able to take off. It was a life and death situation for us, and basically the company has having a heart attack. Just like the treatment for a heart attack, you don't just unclog your arteries, right? You have to do much, much more than that. You also change your diet, also exercise regularly, and stop doing the bad stuff, like smoking and drinking and stressing yourself. You have to get some sleep and think positive. Essentially, work on your new you. You don't only fix on the immediate problems, you also have to help, address the health and behaviors that got you there in the first place. So, step by step, we set out. We fixed the troubled projects, we delivered on what we could, and we negotiated settlement when we couldn't. We invested in marketing and rebuilt our sales force. We invested in business partner training, made new partnerships for new offerings, and rebuilt the leadership team and introduced talent development in the organization. We invested in training and competence development and also tore down all of the barriers between the different companies. We changed many, many small things, like even the office look and feel, and drove a lot more interaction between our companies. And finally, we charted a course to get into the IT offshore outsourcing market, which for us was booming at that time. And we saw this as the next frontier for us. It was a high value, high margin services growth market for the next decade. It was our new you. So in the 4 years, we regained our stride. We built up both the balance sheet and the employee pride and chartered a new direction for the future. We became a source of talent for the parent company, and 2 MDs after me were homegrown. And from those roots, the company is now doing IT offshore outsourcing, a primary source for its growth and expansion to this very day. Unfortunately, they compete with us now. I moved into HP back in 2006. When I joined, there were slightly over 600 employees in our offshore delivery center, servicing the largest and arguably the most important outsourcing account that HP had won globally. We went from supporting a single customer to now supporting over 140 customers from the center. And from 600 employees, we've since grown that to over 6,000 employees across all of the range of services of HP's portfolio. We went from learning the ropes from the more mature locations in HP to eventually becoming named one of the most strategic and most mature outsourcing locations of HP, supporting all of the regions. We also won several accolades for quality and innovation from the local industry awards that recognize the best accomplishments in the industry. We lent out our talent to drive the most important transformation programs of HP globally. So yes, things were really, really looking well for us in the Philippines. HP at that time was also the largest IT company in the world. It had over $120 billion in sales annually. And we also had the historical claim to the roots of innovation, since the HP Garage was the birthplace of Silicon Valley. Strangely enough, the winds of change were once again blowing very rapidly across the global IT landscape. So you know where this is going, right? And you guessed it, in IT, like in many, many global markets, rapid change is basically the new norm. It's like the sun rising every morning. It's almost preordained. So again, young and nimble competition and new technologies are once again redefining the landscape for us. And we, like so many others, find ourselves totally having to redefine and remake ourselves for this future. It's a wonderful time, actually, when we're called to the task, as my dad would actually say, do something bigger than yourself, reach farther than you can reach. My other 0.5 turnaround is actually with HP, and it's still a work in progress. And the trick really is to get 300,000 employees to once again, that feeling that the impossible is within our reach, that we can actually make magic happen. And this really excites all of us to no end. It's really daunting to see the amount of challenge that unfolds in our everyday life. We seem to be forever on the brink of global economic uncertainty, or on the brink of wars or terrorism, or a victim of global warming and the wrath of Mother Nature. But if there is really one pointed lesson in life, it's that the really only constant is change. And if we're not able to embrace it, it'll continue to wash over us. And I am hopeful for the future. Our very own BPO IT services industry in the Philippines has a plan. And we're on track, if not ahead of that. It's truly a bright spot in the country, generating much needed jobs, driving our global competitiveness, and improving the overall business climate for all of us. The Philippines is turning a corner. And finally, after decades, we're showing really positive signs. Developing nations are starting to carve out a more equitable share of the economic apple than in the past, making this part of the world a really great place to be. So there's always a silver lining, right? Regardless of the challenges that we face. When I put all of my experience together, I realized the wisdom and advice I got from my father back then. His words ring true to this day. Try to do things bigger than you are, reach farther than you can reach, and live for others. This is truly what makes life interesting and meaningful. Learn to learn before you learn to do. His other lesson to me. And my own take on strategies for business and career success. Lifelong learning, work hard and be prepared, since you never know what life is going to throw your way. There are 1,000,001 things that need to get done to get the country to where it should be for the future. But our bright spot, our amazing young talented people, may well be just the magic that we need to get this country right. Thank you very much for your time.
Bravo. Such motivational speakers we have. Very good. We'll see our friend a little bit later in the question period. So glad to have you, Noel. Tremendous. Okay. Our next speaker is the lovely and talented Mary Faye Zamora. Of course, I'll just tell a bit of a story here, if you let me. Just a bit of background about your career, just so people have some. But she started also in the IBM organization, which is interesting that so many good people, it seems, came from or through that organization. Mary Faye was another one. Did very well with that group for many years. She then was recruited to run another organization called Headstrong Philippines, which at the time was certainly a very highly respected IT provider and one of the first doing IT outsource work in Philippines in a high quality manner. So she ran that group for a number of years, and then she got a call from what was then called a call center organization. It was a large one, or a good quality one, called Convergys. And I think that because of her background, she kind of wondered, well, why would I work for a call center organization when I'm an IT gal? But anyway, she was convinced to do this, and at the time, Convergys was a small organization. I can't remember how small it was, but a tiny, minuscule organization. in the next or in the next few years, it grew monumentally at a rate that I have never seen an organization grow. Certainly, the industry as a whole grew, but the Convergys organization grew faster than anybody and became what is today, I understand, 35,000 employees it's hit, the largest private sector employer in the nation. So please, a hand for our Convergys friends here. So, okay, you come on up. Mary Faye Zamora named Global Filipino Executive of the Year, Asia CEO Awards last year or the year before. She, her career, of course, recognizing the success of the Philippine group. Her own people have moved up to very senior positions. Now Filipinos run around the world bossing people around in this organization. Mary Faye runs around Europe, Middle East, and the Asia region, bossing around people in a very nice way. I'm sure she does it. And so it's become, what I understand, is certainly one of the most senior Filipino-based in Philippines, that we have. So really quite a story. And in keeping with the innovative approach of Convergys, she's decided to have her talk as more of a, what I think was called a conversation with Mary Faye, and that's the format you'd like to use. So please welcome Mary Faye Zamora.
Good afternoon. I assume that you have been barraged with a deluge of leadership tenets from 7 illustrious men. So we would like to set the tone differently. I'd like to call on stage Nika Pasis, who is the Regional Sales Senior Manager for Corporate Communications of Convergys. You know, I'm a maverick. I always would like to do things uniquely, differently. So what we're going to do is just have a chat. Right, Nika?
Hi, thanks Mary Faye for giving me the opportunity to have a conversation with you. So as you said, today we'll talk about life.
My life.
We'll talk about love.
My love.
And since we're dealing with insights on career and business, we'll talk about women in the workplace.
That's
So,
So, here goes. Girl Abunda.
yeah, I feel like the girl version of Boy Abunda. Okay. But it's very interesting. So, Marife, everyone knows you. You are an exceptional leader and a fearless Filipina. What was your childhood like?
Oh, you know, I would like to tell any young girl out there who is a geek in school, I was a very serious geek in elementary and high school. You know, geek was not invented during my time, but I would presume that that would mean somebody who does nothing but study. I entered school at the age of 5, grade 1. I was accelerated when I was in grade 2 to grade 3 and got into UP at the age of 14. So it works out. So please tell your daughters and even your sons that really all they need to do is to study harder.
Wow, okay, great. So, speaking of insights that you've learned from your childhood, how has your family shaped your perspective about, you mentioned about studying harder, but life in general as well. So how do you think your family has influenced your perspective in life?
You know what? I grew up with parents who are so focused on doing well and doing a lot. I'm the black sheep of the family. All my brothers and sisters graduated valedictorian. I graduated salutatorian. Yeah, I'm so fortunate to have the values that have been passed on to me by my parents. You know, strength of character and sometimes a sense of mischief. My father is tough-minded, and my mother wasn't a very patient woman. If I complained that I was bored, she would tell me, oh, please go and help someone, anyone. So she'd say, go to your tia son and help with the cooking, or go to your sister's room and help with her homework. You know, my parents both had very deep commitment to do something to the world. So to this day, when I'm feeling sorry about myself, I try to look for a good deed to do.
So it's always about altruism
Yes.
and trying to help someone else. Okay. So you said that you wanted to talk about women in the workplace. That's a
Right.
topic that you're very passionate about. And you yourself being in a CEO role, right, with your global responsibility as managing director for Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, can you share with us some insights and advice for everyone, right? Not just for the women, but for everyone in this room, how best to pursue your dreams and emerge at the top?
You know, I'm very fortunate to be with an organization that's run by women. Our CEO is a woman. Our head of global operations is a woman. I report to her. And the country manager for the Philippines is a woman. You know, the one thing that needs to change for women to succeed in the workplace is not the workforce itself. You know, we all seem to take pride in the fact that the Philippines is a very maternalistic society. But do you know that what maternalistic means is that it's the women who do everything, right? Yeah, exactly. So, for example, if a couple works full-time in this country, the woman does 3 times the child care and 2 times the house care than the man does. Correct? Yes. So we really need to change expectations of who does what and how. Right? Now, let me tell you a story. My son is married, and I have a 1-year-old grandson who is the love of my life. My son didn't change diapers at the start, so I had to teach my daughter-in-law to let him do half. Let your husbands do half. Let your husbands put on the diaper front, side, back. You know, yeah, let them do half and learn from it. I see a lot of women correcting their husbands for doing the wrong things to their children, especially to a baby. My God, if you keep on doing that, your husbands will never share in the responsibility. So let them do half.
And do it their own way.
Yeah, I have another story. You know, my brother said to me once, he said, I am babysitting. And I said to him, dude, you're not babysitting. You're a father. You're fathering, parenting. And he hasn't said that to me ever. Yeah. So we need to live in a world where men do half and women allow their men to do half. And also that parenting is not a full-time job for a woman and a half or part-time job for a man.
So those are very...
Applause, please, from the women.
I think there's a lot of realization going around, so that's why it's a little bit overwhelming. And I'm sure, Marife, the global statistics say it, right? And we don't have to cite global statistics. You can just look inside this room, around this room, and know that there are still very few women who occupy key decision-making skills. You know, we're still largely a men-dominated
Yes.
business
You know, Nico,
arena.
what I did was to ask RENA, PEA, to look at all the members of AmCham and count the number of women CEOs who are not COOs or child of owner. And my God, yes, do you know that there are less than 20 women who are leaders in the workplace in AmCham? And I would presume, if you look at the top 1,000 corporations of the country, it's going to be a number that's going to be mind-boggling and discouraging for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know that for many women professionals, one of the things that I often hear, and in Converges we have a lot of women, right, is how do you deal with work-life balance? That's like their number one concern. I'm a woman professional. I would love to grow my career, but how do I deal with this thing called work-life balance? So what do you have to say about that?
You know what? There's no such thing as work-life balance. There's work, and there's life, and there's no balance. Yes.
So can you elaborate on
but
that?
the most important thing that I would tell everyone is this, and I'll tell everyone I meet this. If you want to marry a man, marry the right one. Yes. And when I say yes, find someone who's going to do half, right? Find someone who's going to support your career and not one who's just going to tell you, oh, yes, I allow you to work. I'm supportive of that. But then he has to get up and change the diapers at midnight because that is what it takes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marife. So you mentioned a lot of key insights that will help not just women, but everyone who's aspiring to grow in their careers about, what are some tips to pursue your dreams. So speaking of dreams, because we know that you've achieved so much and you've helped Converges become what it is today, when you were starting Converges operations in 2003, what was the dream like for you as the leader of our company?
I believe in Converges, that it is going to change lives, and it has. When we started, it wasn't all about business. It wasn't even about commerce for its own sake. We only wanted to do one simple thing, and that is to help the Philippines. It was all about something important, significant, and had real impact to our countrymen. Employment, keeping the family together, and improving their quality of life. The story of Converges is about 37,000 men and women today who are helping the country or driving the country to greatness. It's an extraordinary journey that I've been fortunate to see unfold from the beginning. At the start, actually, I thought that we were a small and medium enterprise. I remember that when I was first interviewed for Converges, they told me that I was to build 2 centers in the Philippines and hire 8,000 people. But then, we dreamt big. Our dreams were just enormous, such that today we have 37,000 employees operating in 22 centers across the country, and we did that in 10 years. By the way, we're celebrating our 10th year anniversary today. So the story of Converges is really a story of passion that extraordinary things are possible.
Okay, thanks, Marife. I know that this has really been a remarkable growth because we were just telling our friends in the press 35,000, but we're now 37,000 a couple of weeks later, and we're still continuing to grow. And that's really driven by the dedication of each and every one in our team. So thanks for sharing about how we have started. And so it seems like the expectations have been different when you started and as you helped the company grow. So what are some of the experiences that you can cite alongside the growth story? Let's talk about an anecdote that was about realizing just how big the impact was. And this is a story that you tell pretty often, and I think it's very interesting to share it again to this audience. So share a little bit about that experience.
Actually, Nika, I have 2 stories.
Oh, 2 stories.
All right.
Okay.
The first story happened in 2006. Maybe during that time, the world already knew about Converges and the good things that we were doing in the country. I got a call from Business Week, and I was told that they wanted to interview me. So the next week, they came over. the business editor came, and a photographer was with him. My God, they took my picture. They took photos of me on top of a building. I even had a photo on top of we went to the jeepney loading area in Washington Street in Castle City. They made me stand on top of a jeepney. They took about 500 photos. And of course, I was thinking, with 500 photos, I'll be in the centerfold of Business Week. And when the magazine came, I just had a photo as big as this one. So the lesson there is, do not set your expectations high. But my daughter told me, Mom, you've arrived. You're in Business Week. The second story is something that I told the Manpower Complement of Convergys during our 8th year anniversary. One Sunday morning, I was at home and my phone rang. And somebody on the line said, Ma'am, this is a call from Malacanang. And I said, oh my God, what have we done? So, wow. So when I said hello, it was the president. And he said, you know, Marifea, I just saw this bus with your McDonald's ad, and it said, you're growing to 30,000. And I was laughing inside, and I just replied, and he said, can you grow to 50,000? So I just replied to him, and I said, Mr. President, you're more aggressive than my boss. Yeah. You know, I also sent him a confidential message on Facebook and told him that his call was the highlight of my year, but of course, I don't think he reads that. So after that, I realized that, yeah, maybe we were making a dent in the marketplace. Because I was watching TV, and he was asked about economic growth, and he said, you know, 2 months ago, I inaugurated the building of Convergys at San Lazaro, and I just read today that they're opening up two more centers in Alabang. So, if that is not economic growth, I don't know what is. So, I definitely take great pride, together with the 37,000 people today from Convergys, about what the country has done for us and what we continue to do for the country.
Dr. Bernie Villegas, considered one of the region's most prominent economists. He is a PhD from Harvard University and was one of its youngest ever teaching fellows at age 21. He returned to Philippines after spending a couple of years, or he returned a few years ago after spending a couple of years in IESE Business School in Barcelona, ranked number 1 at the time and still among the top few in the world. Currently on the board of directors of the University of Asia and Pacific, helped found its management development program. He's written numerous best-selling management books. If you go into the bookstore, in the business section, you'll have a hard time not finding books by this fellow. He's been an advisor to 6 Philippine presidents. He's even a CPA. So please, welcome the guy who wrote most of the economics textbooks you read in high school, or in school, and a record holder for the most number of attendees at Asia CEO Forum. Dr. Bernie Villegas, please.
Thank you very much, Richard. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you can observe, I'm wearing exactly the same shirt as you see there. It's not because my wardrobe is limited, but this shirt is a symbol of something I will describe at the end of my presentation. For those of you in the know, this is called a batik barong shirt. It's a combination of the Indonesian and the Philippine national dresses. And I'm sure you already are anticipating that at the end of my talk, I will exhort all of you to be ready for the ASEAN Economic Community that is going to take off in 2015. But that's really anticipating the end. So let me begin by saying that we all have been impressed by the virtues, the values that were emphasized by all the speakers. In a way, I'll be doing something like summarizing all the excellent talks that you have been listening to during the whole day. We've heard about hard work, about integrity, about humility, about perseverance, about time management, about servant leadership, all virtues and values that I hope all of us are trying to nurture. First of all, in ourselves, and then in the people around us. Now, what I'll do, it's not because of any false modesty, I will not talk about myself as such, but I will talk about myself as a member of a management team. Because that is, I think, what I can contribute to the excellent presentations made by the other speakers. And my ideas will be inspired by a bestseller that's now circulating in Europe. It's entitled Building Respected Companies, written by the Dean of the IESE Business School that Richard referred to. The best, and sometimes it's one of the best, business school in the world. In fact, when I went to IESE in 2007, the Economist ranking, which is annual, had IESE as number 1, and my alma mater, Harvard, as number 7. And so you can see how European business schools have gone a long way in executive education. Now, from this book, I borrowed a lot of principles about what is known as collegiate government. I'm sure you all are aware that in the recent past, there were much ado about charismatic leaders. I'm sure you remember the likes of Michael Eisner of Walt Disney, Sandy Weil of Citigroup, Carly Fiorina, very well known to Mr. Noel Mendoza of Hewlett-Packard, Gerger Schrempp of Daimler, and not to mention the more recent star that fell, Hank Greenberg. Oh, these were even more celebrated than people like Lionel Messi or, right now, Gareth Bale. No, for those of you who follow football. The most expensive soccer player right now, Real Madrid just paid 100 million euros for him. But these people, because they were charismatic, they were making waves, they were praised for their leadership. But, as you will remember, all of them ended up in a tragic way. Precisely because management, which especially is based on servant leadership, is not all about charisma. It's all about the way you fuse the board of directors, the CEO, and the executive committee, or the management committee. That is now the requirement of good governance. I'm sure all of you are very aware that the name of the game today, to avoid the Enrons of this world, the Lehmans of this world, etc., is good governance. And good governance requires, I repeat, a cooperative effort among the board of directors, the CEO, and the ExCom. And this is how I will describe the little success of the Center for Research and Communication that started in 1967, almost 50 years ago, literally in a hole in the wall. And I'm not exaggerating. In 1967, Dr. Stanislaw and I led a team of about 5 other young economists. And our first office was the garage of the United Coconut Producers Association on Colorado Street. For those of you who are old enough, you'll remember in Malate, they had Colorado Street, etc., etc. That was lent to us by one of our founders, Ambassador Jose Romero. The year after, we moved to a very small residence. For those of you who are old enough, you will remember this, on Jorge Bocobo Street, right in front of the old Assumption Convent. That was the birth of the Center for Research and Communication. And today, we are University of Asia and the Pacific. That's why I'm going to describe the process of our moving from CRC to UANP. And let me just quantify it. In 1967, probably our total annual revenue, of course, with all the inflation that has happened, you have to use constant prices. Our total revenue was less than 1 million pesos. Today, we have 500 million pesos. Not really dramatic, but that somehow describes quantitatively how we have progressed from that hole in the wall. And in fact, I always compare what we have done in business to what Tony Tan did from an ice cream parlor in Cubao, again, those of you who know the origins of Jollibee, to a fast food chain that is all over Southeast Asia, and that has surpassed McDonald's, can you imagine, the world leader, almost 3-1. That ice cream parlor was, in fact, even much larger than that hole in the wall in which we were. Now, how did we merge precisely? The board of directors, and probably now is my time to recognize the personalities that those of you who have been in the Philippines or doing business here for some time will recognize. CRC was started by Dr. Jess Stanislaw. I'm sure some of you have met him in his efforts to improve governance in corporations through the Institute for Corporate Directors, ICD. So that's his full-time work now, trying to improve governance in the private sector and in government, not only in the Philippines, but in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Malaysia, all over Southeast Asia. Then I said I helped him with probably 5 or 6 other young graduates. And we had as our MANCOM, so Jess was the CEO, and there was, first of all, a MANCOM made up of Jess as executive director, I as executive director, deputy executive director, then the late Colonel Manuel Reyes, who was judge advocate for a while under the Marcos administration, then he retired, and he became our corporate secretary. Then we had Henry Esteban, a top-notch executive at that time, lawyer executive. And then we had, as our board of directors, Dr. Placido Dumapa, Jr. Many of you will remember him, a top banker. During the time of Marcos, he was director of NEDA. He was chairman of DBP. Then we had Tony Ozaita, another top banker. Then, as I said, Ambassador Jose Romero. Then the late Alex Melchor, the one who headed the top technocracy of Marcos. In fact, if you are going to write an accurate history of Marcos, Marcos had an outstanding technocracy. He had the best of the best to be in his cabinet. The unfortunate thing is, he listened more to his cronies than to his technocrats. But there's no question that his technocrats were honest and were trying to do what was right, but not very differently from ERAP, who also had a lot of good people, but he had a midnight cabinet who was running the show. So that is a problem with some of these leaders. But that's why I want to recognize the contribution of these 2 late leaders, Alex Melchor and Armand Fabella, another very outstanding personality during the time of Marcos. So these were the personalities that started this very small think tank called Center for Research and Communication. Now, these are the three most important practices of effective organizations that are able to coordinate the work of the board of directors, the CEO, and the ExCom. These three are, number one, long-term strategic vision. That's the number one job of people on top. They cannot get bogged down in short-term profit-making or short-term firefighting. Their first responsibility, and I'm sure you are practicing that in your respective organizations, is to think long-term and to have a strategic vision for the long term. The second is, and I'm glad it was emphasized by many of the speakers, people development, people development, and people development. To make sure that the people working for you are receiving what is called integral human development. Not just economically, but all the dimensions of their human personality. And in fact, let me just report to you, this is really a scoop, so to speak. I had to sneak out at noontime because the Makati Business Club had as their speaker Cardinal Tagle. And Cardinal Tagle spoke about inclusive growth. And he reminded all of us what, without boasting, we in 1967 were already practicing. And let me say why. Because from the very beginning, our key officials were totally inspired by the social encyclicals of the popes for the last 110 years. Starting from Leo XIII in 1898, those were the principles on which we based all our management practices. And from the very beginning, we already were taking into account what Cardinal Tagle reminded about 100 members of the Makati Business Club at noon today, that inclusive growth is not only making sure that growth trickles down to the poor, which, as you know, is what we are constantly talking about. So when Balisacan, when President Aquino, when all of these people say we must have inclusive growth, they're saying, let the 7.5% growth trickle down to the poorest of the poor. And that definitely is a very important definition of inclusive growth. But that is not the only interpretation. Cardinal Tagle said, equally important is that growth improves all the human beings in the Philippines, not only economically, but politically, culturally, socially, and most importantly, spiritually. That is another definition of inclusive growth. Growth without human development can be cancerous. And that is how, you know how the Cardinal is so good in interspersing his homilies with anecdotes. We were really so impressed with the way he was able to communicate the simple idea, but he gave us anecdotes from his personal life that actually drove some of the people there to tears. No? Then, the third most important meaning in the field of economics. It's how I wrote a lot of textbooks in economics, because these were the materials we were providing economics teachers in Mindanao, in the Visayas, in Luzon, and they were written into manuals, and that's why probably a few of you who took high school economics courses used a book specially that I wrote called Guide to Economics for Filipinos. No? So I think there were 2 generations of students that have already taken courses, and my book on Guide to Economics for Filipinos is already on its 11th edition. And we will continue, of course, to update those textbooks using current data. Then, after economics and education, we introduced management, which is now the biggest in terms of enrollment. Then, one of the most prestigious specializations, integrated marketing communication. I'm very proud of the fact the Philippines is the UNP is the only university to have teamed up with Kellogg to introduce a new specialization called integrated marketing communication. And our students are so much sought after that even in their last year, they already are being swallowed by Unilever, by Procter & Gamble, by advertising agencies, and so on and so forth. And who knows, some of you are the users of our IMC graduates. For those of you who are not familiar with integrated marketing communication, it was an approach that was developed by Kellogg Northwestern that integrated all the fields that have to do with communication, meaning advertising, marketing, journalism, and public relations. So anything that requires creative communication is in that course. And so we have some of the best professionals in that field. Then we introduced IT, a very small program. I was telling our Swiss friends here that we have people in software development. Then we started the Institute for Political Economy, following the British practice of philosophy, politics, and economics. For those of you who come from the UK is very famous for specializations called PPE, especially in the London School. Philosophy, politics, and economics. And that is our IPE, which is going to be merged with the new law school that we're starting this year. It will be called the School of Law and Governance. And then we also started, it's very much in the fledgling state, a School of Science and Engineering. And what we will do, of course, this is a dream, is to focus on those areas of technology that will define the 21st century. And what are they? Definitely IT. Second is biotech. I'm glad there was some people who are in biotech. And third is material science. For those of you who are interested in technology, those are the three areas that will change the 21st century. IT, biotech, and material science, especially nanotechnology. So that's our dream, to have our School of Engineering focusing on those three areas. Now, these are all quote-unquote success stories. We had an utter failure. We were thinking of putting up a School of Health Sciences, and we started with a very high-quality School of Nursing, producing heads of nursing in the different hospitals. The head of nursing in Asian Hospital came from our training program, but then we realized it was impractical, because to move towards School of Medicine and Nursing, you need a first-class hospital. And it was completely beyond our means to construct a first-class hospital. So we gave up that plan. I don't see, I will see it in my lifetime, UNP going into medicine. So these were the things that happened after we did that strategic planning. Now, let me just mention, since many of you are in business, you would recognize these names. I already mentioned David Lee Chu, one of our outstanding graduates. And this is where I would like to make this parenthetical remark. I'm sure you realize from his life story that it is true. Especially boys. I'm so glad Marife also talked about ladies now. In this country, women usually, not only in terms of taking care of babies, no, but women are the entrepreneurs. They're the ones who actually start businesses in this country. Men are retarded. They become doctors, lawyers, engineers. That's a colonial history. And it's the housewife who the whole day is racking her brains, how can I supplement this meager salary being given to me by my husband? So she thinks Sans Rival here and chocolate cake there, or tablia in Batangas. My mother was selling tablia. Tablia is the chocolate bars, no? It's the women who are constantly doing business. It's the Mercado sisters who started Red Ribbon. And since many of you went to IBM, you will remember, Danny Moran was an IBM manager. And so when Red Ribbon reached a high level of development, Tessie, the wife, said, Danny, why don't you resign from IBM and just be my president in Red Ribbon? Well, you know what happened to Red Ribbon. It was so successful that Jollibee bought it for more than 3 billion pesos. So This really emphasizes the fact that we are a matriarchal society, but not only in the regard that Marife described, but even in entrepreneurial activities, women are ahead of men. But why do I refer to David Lee Chu? Precisely because in order to survive in the beginning, what he said was right. All the bright students from all of our high schools in 1989 first tried UP, then Ateneo, then LaSalle. If they all failed, they applied to us. So how do you survive being known as a college of dropouts, people who are rejected by the best universities? Well, we had to do some strategizing. And this is the only, let's say, operational experience I would like to share with you. First thing we said is, in the same way that Marife and company, when they fail, 98 out of 100 who apply because of lack of English proficiency, you know that. Unfortunately, out of 100 in Manila who take exams in English, only 2 pass. But they're very creative. They say, hey, let's take a look at this 98 who failed. And let's run them into intensive software-assisted English improvement programs. And presto, it's amazing how many of these failing students are able to eventually succeed. And Marife and I saw a very beautiful sight of more than 50 Cebuanos. You know how Cebuanos have difficulty saying SSS. They say is, no? With all due respects to those of you who are Cebuanos, no? But we were so impressed. They presented to us these people, and precisely, there were several who gave testimonials. They said, we failed. But then they gave us a program that improved our English, and now I'm employed. In fact, someone said she had 2 offers. So she went in the morning and she accepted a job. In the afternoon, she went to another, and the second offered her a higher salary. So she already resigned from the first, even before she was employed. So she could go to the second, no? So the attrition there was infinite, no? So, but the funny thing was that there was a fellow who was a radio broadcaster, I suppose, in Cebuano, because he was so nervous that he started by saying, I am so nervous. So you see that his English was not that perfect. But then when he more or less consolidated himself, he started speaking like an American, you know, with the Chicago accent, etc., etc. So it's amazing what happened to that fellow. Well, what did we do? We interviewed people like David Lee Chu, and we found out that there are many academically challenged males who will be the Steve Jobs of the future. And that's exactly what David Lee Chu was. Remember, he told you he failed practically all the tests. But in our psychological interview, we found out that people like him, you know, just to exaggerate, there were people like him, we would give a test. Please add 1/2 and 1/3. They would answer 1/5. So, how can you expect this person to survive a university? But then we found out that when he was in grade school, he was already selling peanuts to his classmates, making money. Those are the little anecdotes that you discover. Accept that person, give him a 2-year remedial program, and in his 3rd year, he will blossom into a future Steve Jobs. And that's the story of David Lee Chu. I'm glad he's not here so he doesn't blush. So, then we were able to develop a program that UP Ateneo LaSalle did not have, which we call Entrepreneurial Management EM program. But the trick is, it was only for academically challenged males. And so we had a lot of trouble with the females. They said, hey, you're discriminating against us. But my answer to them is, you are going to be harmed if you are classmates of these people who cannot even add 1/2 plus 1/3. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, you take our School of Management program and get a Bachelor of Science in Management. you have enough in your DNA, especially from your mothers, for you to be entrepreneur. You don't have to take our EM course. So for many years, it was only offered to these academically challenged males, but sooner or later, we had to surrender to the females. No?
Okay, funny you mentioned. Our company does have the same survey that was mentioned earlier, and every year we conduct that survey for Voice of the Workforce. And one of the elements in that survey is the employee engagement scores. So elements of that would be questions around whether you can see your career in the company on the longer term, whether you have discussions with your boss about your future in the company. So there are multiple elements to that engagement, to the level of activity that happens between you and the company with regards to your career and how you feel about staying in the company for the next couple of years. Those are things that we track for the company. And I'm very happy to say, in the 7 years that I've been in HP, our engagement scores have been the highest in the company.
Thank you.
Mary Faye, do you have something to add about that? That's an important issue for Convergys, of course.
Oh, yes. Part of the balanced scorecard of Convergys employees would be our employee opinion survey rating. And the company also does conduct the survey every year. And just like Noel, globally, Convergys Philippines has been top-notch in terms of the employee opinion score for the agents as well as their supervisors.
Very good.
I can add to that back in the day in Maersk, we also, of course, ran engagement surveys run by an external company. And it was a great pleasure to see that, just like in HP, we were able in the service center in Manila to get engagement scores higher than most of the branch offices, most of the front offices, where one would think the jobs are more interesting and challenging when dealing with clients than something process-oriented. But I should also say that when employees answer these 50 or 60 statements with a score, it's also very important that management acts on it. If there's an employee engagement survey that shows certain things need to be corrected, you have to immediately act on it and call focus groups, discussions, etc., to find out what do we need to do to change it. If it's not acted upon, it's a negative thing for the next survey.
Very good. Mark?